Hi guys, Win Pedini here from MeasureBit, and in today's video I'm going to go over how to get conversion data out of Shopify and to get this into your Facebook ads, Facebook Cappy, Google Ads, Google Ads server side, which is similar to Facebook Cappy, Google Analytics and Google Analytics 4. So we're going to be using Google Tag Manager. We're going to be using two implementations, one in the browser, one on the server. I'm going to keep this brief. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but it will give you a conceptual understanding of what's needed in order to make this work. So let's get started. So the first thing you need to do is to add Tag Manager to your Shopify store. And I've covered that in detail in a separate video. Anyone can do this. It doesn't cost you anything. You don't need to use the $2,000 a month Shopify Plus. And like I said, I've gone through that in detail. If you want to see that video, look in the description of this video below and you'll see a link to that. So once you've done that, you will have a Google Tag Manager system set up. It should be completely blank, but then you're going to need to set up a number of variables, tags, and triggers. I won't go into detail on all of those, but I will cover them in brief. And I just want to make a brief point as well that we are using two Tag Manager containers in unison to collect more data. We have one running in the browser on Shopify, and we have one running in the server. And then what we do is we join both data sets together. And we create a type of redundancy, meaning that we expect some of the data to be lost in the browser transaction. And this is because of the privacy protections that are coming into play in the browsers, but also to do with iOS itself. And so getting data about your customers and the transactions that they're doing on your sites and your mobile apps, etc., is in fact becoming more challenging. But with this setup with GTM Browser and GTM Server that I'm going to be showing you or going into brief today, we're able to achieve a 98% accuracy in the data that we're seeing, and then we're able to then repackage that data, send it off to the Facebook Pixel, to Facebook Cappy, to Google Ads, to Google Analytics, and to Google Analytics 4. And in fact, you can send it to any endpoint that you want in any format that you want, as long as you understand what format is expected at the other end. Okay, so let's get into that. I want to look at an example store that we've set up. This is our test store here, and what you first need to do is to open up the console. Now on your machine, whether you're using a PC, Mac, or Ubuntu or Linux setup, the way to open up the console will depend on the machine you're using. On a PC, you hit the F12 button. On other machines, you might need to go to the settings here, and you can see that you got developer tools there. All right, so that's how you open that up. But anyway, I'm going to open that up again here. And what we're going to do is we're going to find the data object to do with Shopify. So if I go window.S Shopify, you'll see that I've got a whole bunch of data there. If I go to Shopify Analytics, there's more specific data to do with the transactions. All right, so Shopify window.shopifyanalytics.meta. Now we can see data to do with the transactions that people are looking at. So if I go to catalog, I'm going to give you an example of this, and then I do a view product. So I'm just going to click on this one here, the Adidas product here. Now, if I click on my window.shopify analytics, a capital S, capital A, otherwise you're not going to get the right thing there, then .meta, you can now see that we've got data pertaining to the product itself. We've got the product ID, we've got the product type, we've got the vendor, we've got the price, etc., etc., etc. So in a nutshell, what happens is that Shopify makes all of the data available about their products, about their journey through the checkout funnel, available here in the browser. And we're able to pull that data out, doing exactly what I'm showing here. And then what we do is we have created some JavaScript, a JavaScript script, to pull out that data and push it into the browser data layer. Now, data layer is something that Google has created for its tools, whether it's Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics 4, or GTag, which is the newer implementation of Google Analytics. And all of those three products from Google share this concept of a data layer, and when you push something data into the data layer, it's now this reserved area that Google can access and store and manipulate and then return that data back to the data layer. So what we do is we grab customer details, whether it's their customer ID, first name, last name, city, country, zip, phone number, etc., email, and we store that in what's called a customer data object. Now, what is a data object? Well, the way I like to explain this is if you were buying a car, you can think of a car as a data object, and that data object has certain parameters. You know, maybe it's a Toyota, so we know its brand. What is its model? It could be a Prius. How many wheels does it have? Well, most cars have 4 wheels, but you know, there are cars that have 3 wheels, and there's cars that have 6 wheels. So it's got 4 wheels, it's got red paint, it's got a 2-liter engine, it goes 200 kilometers per hour. So these are all parameters or properties that describe this data object. And so one of the things that we build early on is this concept of a customer data object with these different parameters that I've already mentioned. The other thing that we do is we can build a data object around the conversion itself. You know, so what is the action that was taken? So in this case, we're looking at a view product. In Google Analytics 4 speak, they call that a view item. And we, in the concept behind the Google Tag Manager containers that we build, we always think about things the way that Google Analytics 4 thinks about things, because this becomes a universal way of thinking about your data. Then when we go to repackage that and send it off to other places like Facebook, like TikTok, etc., then we rename those parameters to be compatible with those other platforms. All right, so we have a view product or a view item action going on here. We have the product ID, the price, the category, the collections, if there's different collections going on there, the product name, and the currency. So that then describes the conversion object. We've already talked about the customer object, and we build out an enhanced e-commerce data object as well. And this is important if you're running Google Analytics, Google Analytics 4, and you're getting an understanding of the customer lifetime value, the different touch points that people have had in their journey with you, whether they come back regularly, every month, every week, they go to different pages, what kind of category of items are they interested in. This data obviously is more important as you start to scale your business. All right, so we've got other events too in this. We've got the view cart, we've got purchase, and we have add to cart. Okay, so those are the main events that we're picking up in our browser setup for Shopify. And that gives us, you'll notice that we're not collecting all of the events. We don't have an initiate checkout. We don't have some of the data there. And the reason for that is because in order to get that, we need to have a server-side Shopify application, which we are in fact creating at the moment. But for the most part, you know, 98%, 99% of businesses probably will get by with just the view item, add to cart, and purchase events. That's plenty for optimizing your Facebook ad campaigns. So let's talk quickly about the variables and triggers. Let the page load. And like I mentioned before, you know, you have to take the data out of Shopify. And the way to do that is in the script that I just showed you, we use what's called a data layer push, and it pushes that data into Google Tag Manager's data layer. And then what we do is we save that data into these data layer variables. If I open one of these up, in this case it's the conversion.category, so this is the category parameter that's associated with the conversion data object. This is really what we do. It's a data layer variable that's called conversion.category. Very, very simple. And any coder, any decent coder should be able to understand this dot notation for JavaScript. Okay, so that's how we push the data from Shopify, from the browser, into Google Tag Manager's data layer, and this is how we then store the data. And then what we can do is then pick up on that data and then insert it into these different tags in Google Tag Manager and send it off in the right direction. So if I, for example, if I open up this add to cart tag here, you'll see that I've got the pixel ID. This is a an add to cart event, and you can see that also I'm setting off this data. So I've got the content category, currency, value, content ID, contents, content type, content collections, and this is especially important if you are running retargeting on Facebook and you've got your catalog, your Shopify catalog associated with your ads account. This becomes extremely important, and this data will now show up there. Also, we're sending that same data through. You can see that each event, add to cart, is triggered by the corresponding events, whether that's an add cart in Shopify, a purchase event, view cart, view item list, view item. These are all common events that we run out of our container. Same thing for Google Analytics 4. You have the basic page view, or when the page loads. We think about things a little bit differently with Google Analytics 4. It's changed, the paradigm of how we track things has changed a little bit. It's event-based rather than session-based. And you can see that it's also triggered by these same events: add to cart, begin checkout, purchase, view cart, view item list, and universal analytics, same thing. So that's how we do it in a nutshell, and that's the concept of it, at least. For us, developing this Shopify data model, pulling the data out, pushing it into the data layer, extracting it, sending it off to different areas, literally took us probably a couple of months to figure this stuff out, and several $1,000s, running this in tandem with different client sites who were prepared to run this alongside of their data, so we thank them for that. What we also do is we send that data through to our server, our GTM server, or Google Tag Manager server. We pick up on that same data, and then what we do is we send that off, in this case to Facebook CAPI and Google Analytics 4 via the server side, and Universal Analytics 4 via the server side. This is a more reliable way of doing things. It's more reliable to send your data from the server rather than from the browser, because the browser can block a lot of the transactions that are going out from the browser, and this hence explains why people are getting some of their data that's missing, and we get around some of this by employing Google Tag Manager server. One of the other things that's just come up recently, which is worth mentioning here, probably in the last month or two, is Google Ads new Google Ads conversion tracking via server side, and Google Ads remarketing. These are all server-side transactions now that you can send from Google Tag Manager server, much like Facebook CAPI. So these are working very much like Facebook CAPI, and they're the alternative to sending data to Google Ads via the old Google Ads Pixel. Okay, so let's do some testing. So the way to do that in Google Tag Manager is you click on this little preview button up here. Next thing we do is to put in an address. In this case, my one is shoptest.bitbaker.ai. For you, you'd be putting in your web address. And then this takes us to our landing page. So let's see what's happened here. We've got some data coming through. So you can see the tags that aren't fired, and you can see the tags that are. So once the first thing is that we've fired off this Shopify conversions tag. At the same time, we've fired off a number of other tags here too: Universal Analytics, Facebook Pixel, Google Analytics 4, and we also track queries that are incoming from the links. So we'll grab out of that the FB CLID, the G CLID, MS CLID. I think there's one for LinkedIn. You got UTMs, UTM source, UTM campaign, etc., etc. So this little tag here picks up on a lot of that data, stores it in our system, and then this is useful for when you're doing your own first-party tracking. And also Google Analytics itself picks up on this data and stores it as well. All right, so that's the basic setup. So that everything looks like it's working right. One thing that we also do here as well is to do a preview on the server side, so you can see the data coming through there and how that works. And one other thing that we need to do when we're testing is to do the Facebook CAPI testing. So let's go through that. May as well do that all at the same time. So we're going to go in here into the test events section under the events manager, and then grab our test code. Always make sure that when you're doing testing to grab a fresh copy of the test code, because what happens is that it expires. So if you come back the next day, it's more than likely that this test code has changed and you wonder why there's no data showing up here. So I'm going to go into my GTM browser container, look for the Facebook test event code. I'm going to put that variable in here, and our system is configured to look for that code. If it does exist, then it will start sending data through to Facebook Cappy in the test mode. If there is no data there, if the value is null, you saw that word N-U-L-L, null means nothing, then the system will ignore any test data coming through and the data will be streaming live to your Facebook ads. And this is important if you're running ads, because you don't want to be missing out on data if you're not in test mode. Okay, so that's the Facebook Cappy testing mode set up. I also want to do the same for Google Analytics. You can see here that I've got Google Analytics 4 running, but this works equally well for Universal Analytics or Google Analytics 4. I just want to show you this data showing up in different systems. So I'm going to go to the configure section, and each, Google Analytics 4 and Universal Analytics work a little bit differently when you're debugging. Google Analytics 4, in my opinion, has got some really nice debugging capabilities and testing capabilities built in. Okay, so you can see my data stream here for debugging. And now let's relaunch our container with that new information in there for testing. So I'm going to click on preview. Always click on preview when you're doing this. Don't submit the changes unless you're really sure that all your testing's been done. Reason for this: number one, it's more safer to do it this way. Number two, it means that your customers aren't going to be seeing any of the changes until you're ready to do this. Number three, it's just a lot quicker. It's a lot quicker to do it this way. All right, so we got a page view event here. Now let's see what data is coming through. Hopefully everything looks good. Okay, great. We're getting, before we do that, let's have a look in our browser. Upon the container loading, we had our Shopify conversions tag loading. Okay, so we've got the data there. What you might see that is missing currently is Facebook Cappy. But we stream that data through to our GTM server, and now you can see the data showing up here. There's our Facebook Cappy, right? This is being sent server side, hence why we're not sending it from the browser, because you're not going to be seeing that there anyway. And once again, we stream that data to Universal Analytics and Google Analytics 4 via the server side. This is just a much more secure way of doing it. And you might notice that there's something else going on there too in terms of cookie rewrites. Now with iOS and Safari, what they do now is even first-party cookies, so third-party cookies are dead. These are cookies that are written by Facebook and Google Analytics on our behalf, but from the context of their own websites. Now if that sounds like gobbledygook, don't worry. It just means that somebody else has written a cookie in the browser that's not owned by your domain. So in this case it's shoptest.bitbaker.ai. If it wasn't written from my web server, then that's a third-party cookie, and those are pretty much dead now. Cookies that are written in the context of your website or your mobile app are first-party cookies, and they're much more highly respected because they're harder to hack by third parties that want to use the information in the cookies, and these are a lot more secure. But even so, iOS 14, iOS 15 still makes those cookies expire within 1 week, 7 days. So we have a system here that rewrites those cookies, makes them persist for longer. So if you know that your customer journey typically takes, like let's say on average a month to convert, then you want to have data that spans for longer than a month, because you're going to have this long tail effect where you have people converting out 3 or 6 months from now. So I would suggest that somewhere in the vicinity of maybe 6 months is probably right for most people. If you're doing lead generation, then obviously a week is probably sufficient. All right, so we have our tags loading, so things are looking good. And we also see that the same data now is being picked up here. We have a page view. We see our browser ID, IP address, user agent. These are the things that our container is sending through. We also have a deduplicating event ID. Now, this is one of the things that's problematic for a lot of people with with Shopify and the native Facebook app integration. What's happening, the reason why you're getting different data coming through and it sees those two events as separate is because this event ID is different. It amazes me that Shopify and Facebook have still yet to fix this issue, and hence why we came out with our own custom solution to this. And you see the same page view coming through from the server and the browser, and then what Facebook does is it deduplicates that. It says, okay, cool, you got the same event ID, you must be the same event. Even if you were to send the same event 100 times, it doesn't matter, as long as those events arrive at Facebook's end within a 5-minute period. Joins that data together, crunches it down into one event, and now it says, okay, I got one event, and it's this thing here. All right, so that's how the event deduplication works. The fact that you're getting a browser event and a server event is good news. Okay, so that's turning up in Facebook. Does it show up in Google Analytics 4 in this case? And the answer is yes, it does. And there's our event there. You can see this event stream, and if you go back further in time, you can scroll down and see other events that have happened. So if I click on that, then it shows me all of the parameters. This is really handy, by the way, for debugging. It shows us all the parameters that are associated with it. And if you hit these things here, you can see here it is here. This is this event 8442 undefined. Let's have a look here. 8442 _ undefined. Perfect. It's the same event. And we've got other data that's there too that could be useful for whatever you're doing. This one says medium, event location, referrer, page title, and obviously depending on the parameters that you're setting through, you'll get more data. Okay, so let's do another event here just to test the thing. Go to catalog, and I'm going to do a page view, and let's see what comes up in our event stream here. So we can see that our Shopify conversions tag is now beginning to push these data layer pushes, right? And so now we see this event here showing up. If I go into the data layer tab here, you can see the exact JSON object, JavaScript object notation object that's been pushed through into the data layer. Here's our conversion data object. Here's our customer object. We don't have any customer data, hence why it's empty. But we have the action. It's a view item. Its product ID is 682. Its value is $70. It's accessories, Adidas content. And we also have our enhanced e-commerce. We can see the same thing here when we go to the variables, and we can see the various pieces of data that we're now starting to store. View item, accessories, Adidas, etc., etc. And this is the data that's now being repackaged and sent off to the server side. And if I were to open up one of these here to show you, where is it? Facebook Cappy. Now we can see data that's being sent here. Now if I open that up, and I can see that I've had a post request to Facebook, and the fact that it says 200 means that that signal was sent successfully, that Facebook received it and returned a 200 message saying, yes, I got it, I'm happy. And if you open it up here, you can see the data that's been sent through. It looks like gibberish because it's all crunched up, but we can see, if we studied it a bit closer, you can see that the data is exactly the same data that we're seeing in Facebook Cappy, in Google Analytics 4, and so everything is good. All right. I'm not going to go further with that, but that's the general gist of it. That demonstrates how you not only do this stuff, but also how you debug it in the Facebook Event Manager, in Google Analytics 4 in this case, but also in the preview mode for Google Tag Manager Browser and Google Tag Manager Server. So hopefully that gave you a conceptual understanding. If it has, that's achieved my goal at least for wanting to communicate the general ideas that you need to have in place in order to be able to get accurate data out of Shopify to then repackage it and send it off in the different directions that it needs to go, whether it's Facebook ads, Google Analytics, or any other system that you need it to go to. At the end of the day, the main idea is to be able to collect reliable data and then repackage it. You collect that data once, repackage it, and then send it off to where it needs to go. When you can do that, the possibilities for what you can do with your data really open up. And this is really important as your store begins to scale. The more traffic, the more sales that you're making, the more critical it is that you're making intelligent, accurate, evidence-based decisions about what to scale up and what to kill, whether it's an ad set, an ad, a campaign, a channel, and understanding what your customer lifetime value is for your customers, depending on how long they've been with you, the different touch points that they've gone through. Maybe you have more than one site, maybe you have a mobile application. Understanding what kind of data you're collecting and what kind of touch points you have with your customers and how those are affecting the customer lifetime value is key. But it all starts with getting accurate data, or as accurate as you can, with the limitations that we have these days with privacy concerns, whether it involves CCPA in California, whether it's GDPR in Europe, or whether it's iOS 14 or 15. Just getting good data is more challenging. But the good news is that if you start with collecting good data, you start with good systems like Google Tag Manager, Google Tag Manager Server, and getting data directly out of the APIs, whether it's Facebook ads, whether it's Shopify, whether it's some other system, and then joining it together in a way that makes sense, forming your own single source of truth. It doesn't really matter if Facebook and Google are misattributing things, because as long as you understand, you can make decisions, accurate decisions, about what to do in your marketing. So hopefully that's been helpful, and if it has, please leave a like on this video. It does help us, and it helps others who are in the same position as you to find answers for their tracking issues. Also, if you have a Shopify store and you want help with that, or even if you don't have a Shopify store, maybe you're on WooCommerce or some other system, we work with a lot of clients across a number of different industries, and we are having great success. Like I said, we get 98% accuracy with the data that we're pulling out. And in terms of Facebook and Facebook CAPI, we're getting like a 9.1 match rate with the data that we're pulling out, sometimes higher depending on the system that we're talking about. So that's really great news. So if you want to talk to us about tracking and analytics, by all means, there's a link in the video below where you can schedule a free 15-minute call, and I look forward to talking with you. Thanks.